The first words out of my mouth silenced an entire restaurant. So, why is that my responsibility? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't sound angry. I simply asked the question that nobody at the table expected to hear. Across from me, my stepson Ethan stopped breathing for a second. His wife, Chloe, held her champagne glass in midair, frozen. Even the waiter, who had been reaching for our empty plates, quietly stepped back as if he sensed a storm coming. 10 seconds earlier, we had all been celebrating. Now every smile had disappeared. Ethan stared at me in disbelief. "You're joking, right?" I folded my napkin carefully onto my lap and met his eyes. "No," I answered calmly. "Not at all." The silence that followed felt heavier than the expensive crystal hanging above us. And that was the exact moment I realized something that changed everything. This dinner had never been about celebrating a new baby, it had always been about taking my house. My name is Margaret Holloway. I'm 62 years old, and I've spent my entire adult life building something most people never notice until it's gone: financial security. I wasn't born into wealth. Nobody handed me success. I earned every bit of it. More than 30 years ago, I started a tiny bookkeeping business from a folding table squeezed into the corner of my spare bedroom. While other people spent weekends relaxing, I worked. While friends upgraded cars and took vacations they couldn't afford, I stayed disciplined. Little by little, year after year, those sacrifices added up. Eventually, I bought the one thing I'd dreamed about for decades: a peaceful lake house overlooking Lake Martin. It wasn't some massive mansion. Just a comfortable 4-bedroom home with a wraparound porch, towering oak trees, and quiet mornings where the only sound came from birds singing over the water. Every payment came from my own bank account. Every brick represented years of hard work. That mattered more than anyone at the restaurant understood. Richard, my husband, had invited me to dinner that evening with a mysterious smile. "You're going to love tonight," he'd said earlier. "What are we celebrating?" I'd asked. "Ethan wants to surprise us." Those words should have made me suspicious. Because in my experience, Ethan's surprises usually ended with someone else paying the bill. About 20 minutes after Richard and I arrived, Ethan and Chloe walked in. The happiness on Chloe's face was impossible to miss. She practically glowed as she sat beside Ethan. Before the waiter even brought our drinks, she reached into her purse and carefully placed a small black and white ultrasound photo on the table. "I couldn't keep the secret any longer," she whispered. For a heartbeat, nobody spoke. Then Richard gasped, "You're having a baby?" Chloe nodded, tears filling her eyes. The table exploded with excitement. Richard hugged Ethan so hard he nearly knocked over his water glass. I stood and wrapped Chloe in my arms, genuinely happy for her. After years of hearing them talk about starting a family, this was wonderful news. For the next 20 minutes, everything felt perfect. We laughed about baby names. We joked about who the child would resemble. Richard proudly declared he'd spoil the baby from day one. Even I found myself imagining tiny footsteps running across holiday floors. It felt like the beginning of something beautiful. Then Ethan quietly cleared his throat. His expression changed. "So," he began, leaning back comfortably, "with the baby coming, we've been thinking about moving." I smiled. "That makes sense." Their townhouse had always been a little cramped. A growing family would naturally need more room. "We actually found the perfect place," Chloe added excitedly. "That's wonderful," I replied. "But," Ethan said slowly. There it was. That single word changed the atmosphere instantly. "But the down payment is bigger than we expected." I nodded politely without saying anything. Ethan glanced at Chloe before looking back at me. "We figured family helps family." Something inside me tightened. I'd heard that sentence before. It almost never ended well. Then Ethan smiled, a smile far too confident for someone making such a request. "We were hoping you'd help us buy it." I rested my fork beside my plate. "What exactly are you asking?" Before Ethan could answer, Chloe leaned forward. You've always been financially comfortable. I've worked very hard, I corrected gently. Exactly, she replied with a bright smile. Which is why this shouldn't be difficult for you. Then Ethan mentioned the amount they wanted. For a split second, I honestly thought I'd misunderstood. But what he said next would leave me questioning whether this dinner had ever been about celebrating their baby at all. Ethan repeated the number without the slightest hesitation. It wasn't a small favor. It wasn't temporary help. It was enough money to change someone's entire financial future. For a moment, I simply looked at him. Not because I couldn't afford it, but because of how casually he expected me to hand it over. Before I could respond, he smiled again. Actually, he said, there's an even easier option. A quiet alarm rang in the back of my mind. What option? You could sell the lake house. The words landed like a block of ice. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. Chloe eagerly joined in. You don't really need such a big place anymore. And a condo would be much easier, Ethan added. Closer to town. Less maintenance. It would be perfect for you. Perfect? For me? No. Perfect for them. In that instant, everything became painfully clear. This wasn't a conversation they just thought of during dinner. They had planned it. They had discussed it. Maybe even rehearsed it. Somewhere along the way, they had already decided what should happen to my home. They weren't asking for advice. They were presenting a plan. My plan. Without ever asking what I wanted. I slowly turned toward Richard, hoping he'd step in. He shifted uneasily in his chair, avoiding my eyes. He looked uncomfortable. But he said nothing. That silence hurt more than Ethan's request. Chloe reached across the table with an almost comforting smile. We're not asking you to lose everything, she said softly. We just think this makes the most sense for everyone. Everyone. Interesting choice of words. Because the only people benefiting from this arrangement were sitting across from me. I folded my napkin neatly and placed it beside my plate. Then I smiled. First of all, congratulations on the baby. Both of them relaxed instantly. I could almost see the relief on their faces. They thought I was about to agree. Instead, I calmly asked, why is your housing problem my responsibility? The smiles disappeared. Ethan frowned. What? I understand you're expecting a child, I continued evenly. But why does that automatically become my financial obligation? His voice became sharper. Because we're family. I nodded thoughtfully. I married your father. His eyebrows pulled together. Exactly. No, I replied quietly. Those aren't the same thing. The words struck harder than I intended. For years I'd cared about Ethan. I'd attended birthdays, graduations, holidays, and family dinners. I'd supported him through difficult moments without expecting anything in return. But caring about someone doesn't mean writing blank checks for every decision they make. Especially decisions involving luxury homes. Ethan leaned forward. So you're refusing to help? I didn't say that. Hope immediately returned to Chloe's face. Then I finished my sentence. I said I'm not buying you a house. The hope vanished. The cheerful celebration we'd enjoyed only minutes earlier dissolved before my eyes. Suddenly the baby was no longer the center of attention. Money was. Chloe looked down at the table. I guess we know where we stand. I took a slow breath. No, Chloe. You know where my boundaries are. Boundaries? Ethan laughed bitterly. You've got plenty of money. And I earned every dollar. His expression hardened. So what's the point of having it if you won't help family? I looked directly into his eyes. The point is security. The point is independence. And the point is never being forced to depend on someone else. For a second, nobody spoke. Even nearby conversations seemed distant. Then Ethan pushed his chair back with enough force to make it scrape loudly across the floor. I honestly didn't think you'd be this selfish. There it was. The word people often use when they don't get what they want. Selfish. Funny how protecting your own property suddenly becomes selfish when someone else wants it. I calmly picked up my purse. I truly hope everything works out for both of you. Richard finally spoke. Margaret. I looked at him. We'll talk later. I kissed him lightly on the cheek. Then I turned toward Chloe. I wish you a healthy pregnancy. Finally, I nodded politely at Ethan. Good night. Without another word, I walked out of the restaurant. The cool evening breeze hit my face as I stepped outside. For a brief moment, I believed the awkward dinner was over. I thought everyone would sleep on it, calm down, and eventually move forward. I couldn't have been more wrong. Less than 30 minutes after I arrived home, my phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. And again. Message after message poured onto my screen. Someone had created a brand new family group chat. At the very top sat Ethan's version of the evening. According to him, I'd chosen money over my future grandchild. According to him, I'd abandoned family when they needed me most. And as dozens of relatives began replying without knowing the truth, I realized something chilling. Dinner had only been the beginning. The real battle was about to start. I sat in my living room long after the messages stopped making sense. The lake outside my windows was perfectly still, but my phone vibrated every few seconds. New notifications filled the screen faster than I could read them. One message after another. Family should always come first. Think about the baby. I'm disappointed in you. Not one person asked what had actually happened. They had already decided I was guilty. By sunrise, the story had spread far beyond the dinner table. I had barely poured my first cup of coffee when my phone rang. Linda. Richard's older sister. I answered with a polite, "Good morning." She skipped the greeting. "Margaret, what happened last night? I imagine you've already heard Ethan's version." A heavy sigh came through the phone. "I just don't understand why you wouldn't help them." There it was again. Not what they asked. Not how much they wanted. Only why I refused. "Linda," I asked calmly, "did Ethan tell you they wanted me to sell my lake house?" Silence. "Did he tell you how much money they asked for?" Another pause. "No," she admitted quietly. "He only said you embarrassed them." "I didn't embarrass anyone," I replied. "I simply said no." She didn't argue after that, but I could hear uncertainty replacing confidence. When we ended the call, another one arrived almost immediately. Then another. By lunchtime I'd spoken to 5 different relatives. Every conversation sounded almost identical. Everyone knew the edited version. Nobody knew the truth. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the family group chat. The screen was overflowing with messages. Some came from cousins I hadn't seen in years. Others came from relatives who lived across the country. Yet suddenly they all felt qualified to judge me. Money can't replace family. A grandmother should sacrifice. The baby deserves better. One comment caught my attention. "If you have enough to own a lake house, why not share your blessings?" I stared at the words. The irony almost made me smile. For years I had shared. When Ethan's old car broke down, I quietly paid for repairs. When his wedding expenses got out of control, I wrote a check without telling anyone. When he needed professional financial advice for his business, I spent evenings helping him, for free. No one remembered those moments. Kindness has a strange way of becoming invisible once people start expecting it. I closed the app and drove to my office. Work had always been my escape. Numbers never lied. Balance sheets never twisted the truth. People, unfortunately, did. I buried myself in client files, tax reports, and financial statements. For several peaceful hours, I almost forgot about the family drama. Then my assistant knocked softly on my office door. "Margaret. Can I ask you something?" I looked up. "Of course." She hesitated before speaking. "I saw something online." A knot formed in my stomach. "What did you see?" She handed me her phone. It wasn't Ethan who had posted this time. It was Chloe. A beautiful ultrasound picture filled the screen. Below it was a carefully written caption. "It's heartbreaking when the people you've always loved refuse to stand beside you during your hardest season. But we'll keep trusting God and fighting for our little miracle. Thousands of reactions. Hundreds of comments. Complete strangers were calling them brave. Others condemned the unnamed family member who had supposedly abandoned them. I never appeared by name. I didn't have to. Everyone who knew us understood exactly who the villain was supposed to be. I returned the phone. "Thank you," I said quietly. She gave me a sympathetic smile. "You don't owe me an explanation." I appreciated that more than she realized. That evening I returned home emotionally drained. Not angry. Just disappointed. Richard arrived shortly after sunset. We ate dinner on the back porch overlooking the lake. Normally we'd talk about our day. That night, only the sound of crickets filled the silence. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. "I think." He stopped. "What?" "I think you could have handled dinner differently." I slowly put down my fork. "Really?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "The way you answered them felt harsh." I looked at him for several seconds. Not once had he said Ethan was wrong. Not once had he mentioned Chloe crossing a line. Instead, somehow my reaction had become the problem. "They asked me to sell my home," I reminded him. "They were emotional. They were entitled. They're excited about becoming parents. And apparently excitement gives people permission to spend my money." Richard sighed deeply. "You know that's not what I mean." "Then explain what you do mean." He couldn't. Because there was no reasonable explanation. The silence between us stretched until he quietly said something that caught me off guard. "Ethan feels like you've never truly accepted him." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because after 12 years of supporting him through weddings, emergencies, birthdays, holidays, and financial problems, acceptance was somehow still measured by what I was willing to give. I looked across the lake as the last light disappeared behind the trees. Slowly, an uncomfortable thought settled into my mind. Maybe this had never been about money. Maybe, somewhere along the way, Ethan had convinced himself that my house already belonged to him. If that was true, then saying no wasn't just disappointing him. It was ruining a future he'd already imagined. And I was about to discover just how far he was willing to go to make that future a reality. The next morning, I stopped wondering if Ethan had crossed a line. I started asking myself how far he was willing to go. After breakfast, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, replaying everything that had happened. The dinner, the family pressure, the social media posts, Richard's reaction, none of it felt random anymore. Something bigger was happening. Instead of guessing, I decided to find facts. My first call was to an old friend who had worked in real estate for years. My second was to a mortgage broker I trusted. The third was to Rebecca Sloan, an attorney who had handled property matters for my business before. At the time, I didn't realize those 3 phone calls would completely change the way I saw Ethan. That afternoon, I met the mortgage broker for coffee. He looked uneasy before we even ordered. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Did you agree to help Ethan and Chloe qualify for a mortgage?" "No." He frowned. "That's strange." "Why?" "They've been asking questions about your financial assets." I stared at him. "What kind of questions?" "They wanted to know whether a close family member's financial strength could improve their chances of getting approved." A chill ran through me. "They mentioned me?" He nodded slowly. "They never directly asked for your money." He paused. "But they were definitely trying to figure out how valuable your financial position could be." I left the cafe with far more questions than answers. 2 days later, another answer arrived. My real estate friend called. "Margaret, someone recently requested information about your lake house." I frowned. "The ownership records are public." "Yes," he replied. "But this wasn't a routine request." "What do you mean?" "They specifically asked whether your property had been transferred into a trust." I froze. Very few people even knew my estate plan existed. Years earlier, after watching one of my clients go through a painful inheritance dispute, I'd quietly placed several of my assets into a trust. It wasn't a secret. It was simply responsible planning. So why was Ethan suddenly asking about it? That evening, I opened social media with a different purpose. Not to defend myself. To understand him. Within half an hour, a pattern appeared. Luxury restaurants. Weekend trips. Designer clothes. Expensive electronics. New furniture. The lifestyle looked successful. The finances probably weren't. People who are financially secure rarely spend every day proving they are. Late that night, my phone rang. It was Carol, my next-door neighbor. Her voice sounded nervous. "Margaret. I wasn't sure if I should call." "You did? What's wrong?" "I saw Ethan this afternoon." "So? He was parked outside your house." I sat up straighter. "He got out of his car." My stomach tightened. "And then?" Carol hesitated. "He walked all around your property taking pictures." The room suddenly felt colder. "Pictures? Of my house?" I thanked Carol and slowly ended the call. Standing alone by the living room window, I looked toward the peaceful lake. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't thinking about family arguments anymore. I was thinking about evidence. Because people don't secretly photograph someone else's property unless they're planning something. And deep down, I had a feeling Ethan's real plan hadn't even begun. Rebecca Sloan wasted no time. The morning after I discovered the missing estate documents, I sat across from her desk and told her everything, from the dinner at the restaurant to Ethan and Chloe entering my house without permission. She listened quietly, occasionally making notes, but never interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "This isn't about helping with the house anymore," she said. "They're trying to gain control over something they believe already belongs to them." Her words confirmed what my instincts had been telling me for weeks. Over the next several days, Rebecca's team began gathering records. What they uncovered shocked even me. Ethan hadn't been honest with anyone. He had quietly lost his job months earlier after serious financial problems at work. His townhouse payments were several months behind, credit cards were nearly maxed out, and collection notices had already started arriving. The dream home they described at dinner had never been a realistic plan. They weren't preparing for a better future, they were trying to escape a financial disaster. The investigation revealed something even worse. Using information copied from my missing documents, Ethan had tried to strengthen loan applications by suggesting he would eventually inherit my lake house. When that failed, he took an even darker path. A few days later, I was served with legal papers. Ethan had filed a petition questioning my mental competence, claiming I was becoming irrational and unable to manage my own finances. Chloe supported his claims with carefully written statements, painting me as a confused older woman who needed supervision. Rebecca wasn't surprised. "They're trying to pressure the court into giving them influence over your assets," she explained. "But they made one mistake." "What mistake?" I asked. "They underestimated the truth." The hearing arrived 2 weeks later. Inside the courtroom, Ethan tried to present himself as a caring son who only wanted to protect family. Chloe spoke emotionally about her pregnancy, hoping sympathy would outweigh facts. Then Rebecca stood. One document after another appeared before the judge. Employment records proved Ethan had hidden the truth about losing his job. Financial reports exposed massive debts. Loan applications showed unauthorized use of family financial information. Even the recordings Ethan submitted as evidence were revealed to be edited, with important conversations deliberately removed. As each piece of evidence was presented, the confidence on Ethan's face slowly disappeared. The judge reviewed everything carefully before delivering his decision. The petition was denied completely. He criticized the misleading statements, questioned Ethan's credibility, and made it clear that manipulating the court for personal gain would not be tolerated. For the first time since all of this began, the truth spoke louder than rumors. Before everyone left, I stood and looked directly at Ethan. "My lake house was never yours," I said calmly. The courtroom became silent. "I built it with my own hands, my own sacrifices, And my own money. Then I shared something almost no one knew. Months before the restaurant dinner, I had already updated my estate plan. After my death, the lake house would not pass to any family member. Instead, it would become part of a charitable trust that would provide peaceful retreats and financial support for widows and older women rebuilding their lives. Ethan's face turned pale. The house he had been planning around, the inheritance he believed was waiting for him, had never belonged to him in the first place. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. Sunlight reflected across the wet pavement as Richard slowly walked beside me. "I'm sorry," he whispered. This time, I believed him. Not because the words erased the past, but because I finally saw genuine regret in his eyes. Healing would take time. Trust would have to be rebuilt. But at least the lies were over. As for Ethan and Chloe, I truly hoped they learned something from everything they had lost. Financial problems can happen to anyone, but entitlement destroys far more families than debt ever will. When I drove back to the lake house that evening, the water was calm again. I stepped onto the porch, took a deep breath, and watched the sunset paint the sky with shades of gold and orange. For weeks, people had tried to convince me that saying no made me selfish. Standing there, I finally understood the opposite. Kindness is a gift. Obligation is not. Helping someone should always come from love, never from guilt, pressure, or manipulation, because no one is entitled to the future you spent a lifetime building. And sometimes, the strongest act of love is having the courage to protect the life you've earned, even from the people who believe it already belongs to them.